Hey everybody, I'm Pastor Megan Rohrer. I'm at Grace Lutheran. We're in the Godcast room. If you want, you can join us on Sundays at 10:30 in person or on our live stream right in this same spot. Not on Pastor Susan's page. Today, for the first time, we're simultaneously live both on both of our pages.
On both of our pages.
Which, by the way, who are you?
I am Pastor Susan Strauss, and I'm actually the coordinator for Pluralism Sunday, which is on the first Sunday of May every year. It's an event that's sponsored by progressivechristianity.org. So if you go onto their website and type in Pluralism Sunday, you can find the page where we are. You can sign up to be a participant or find out more about what it's all about. But the best way to find what it's all about is right here, either in person at Grace Lutheran Church on April 27th, Saturday, April 27th.
3 p.m.
At 3 p.m. We will be having a pluralism service, or you can see it live stream either on Pastor Megan's Facebook page or Pastor Susan's Facebook page, and then later on it will be up on the Pluralism Sunday
where they can get the bulletin and other resources
and everything you need to know. This year too, just note that Pluralism Sunday, the first Sunday of May, is also the first day of Ramadan. So what a great opportunity to do something in your community, reaching out to your Muslim siblings and do something together. So just a heads up.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. But today we wanted to talk to you a little bit about paths and how to find your path. And that's language that comes from Christian scripture. There's this idea that Jesus is the path. The Hebrew, when it talks about the path of God that we're supposed to follow, is something like a deep rutted road, like the kind of road you find out in the country from wagon wheels. Like it's so well trodden that you can easily follow it. So you follow this way that your ancestors have gone. That's kind of the Hebrew. Okay. In the Greek, there's this idea, it's most often translated that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the light. Jesus is the path towards God. But it's equally true that ancient Greek means where it says the. So you could choose to read it, Jesus is a way, a truth, and a light, or Jesus is a path.
Okay.
And you can also think of it as being a path that other people are walking on with their faith with you. Mm-hmm. Okay. And there are some other faiths that think similar to that too.
Yeah, I like to think of the way in the sense of the Tao. The Tao also means way or road. And the Tao, for me, brings it out into a much broader idea than simply the historical Jesus, into what some may call the cosmic Christ, some may even simply say universe, Buddha nature, all kinds of ways to broaden that idea of path or road or way. And I also like thinking about the way as the Tao, because in Taoism it says once you have named the Tao, then that's not the Tao. So in a lot of ways, understanding even as much as we can understand Jesus, the historical Jesus, but in a lot of ways in that broader sense of what the way is a sometimes very mysterious. Even though it's a well-trodden path, there's also a mystery about it as well.
Yeah. Well, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's a Lutheran who lived during the time of Adolf Hitler, he was an ethics professor, and he taught people that they were supposed to follow the Ten Commandments, and he knew that God had commanded him not to kill. But then he also thought that God has a personal calling for people. And so he also felt like, as a German living in the time of Hitler, he was called to participate in the plot to try to assassinate Hitler. He ends up dying in a concentration camp at the end of the war. But he kind of helps articulate a lot this idea that there's the communal calling that God might have. There might be some communal principles that God has for how communities live in the world. But there's also a way in which we individually have a path we're supposed to follow, or a calling we're supposed to follow, or a I like to think of it as a sparkle. All of us have a sparkle in us, and we just have to try to help it hit the light so that it can like be visible in the world. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts about how people can figure out how they're called to follow God specifically, and what that means for how they walk forward in their faith.
Boy, as you were talking about Bonhoeffer, it just made me think about Jesus entering Jerusalem. I mean, it's Palm Sunday, it's Sunday, and thinking about that path, Jesus walking on that path into Jerusalem on that donkey, while Pilate is entering with his great military parade on the other side of the city, and that path that Jesus is taking toward suffering and death. I don't believe that he willingly chose a path of suffering and death because that
Torture.
was a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
Nor should we. And yet that idea that sometimes the path does lead us to do things, to make a stand, to take a stand on the path, as Bonhoeffer did. And they're not always very easy things to do. And I think today a lot of pastors, preachers, leaders in the church are having a struggle and thinking about how do I proclaim where I stand on things today, ethical, political issues today. When that path may take us into areas where people don't agree with us, people get angry with us, but what kind of stand am I willing to take? Jesus was willing to make that stand, which was all well and good as long as people were waving the palms around and crying Hosanna. But when it turned and said, "Oh, hey, whoa, Jesus, now you're getting political. You can't do that," then it got hard. So, what was the question again?
No, but I think Martin Luther chose a path that was very divergent from what the people of his day were talking about, and it took a black plague to shake them up, right? And to think about faith differently. But he comes to a moment in his faith where he declares, "Here I stand and I can do no other." May we all be so emboldened that we can proclaim that. And we don't know if he regretted saying that later.
Probably some days.
Right? We all do. Yeah. Right? But he found a place of boldness to figure out what was his path forward. And he brought a community forward with him who ended up becoming Lutherans. The difficulty is that didn't come without wars all over the world, right? Change is hard, and it creates conflict. And so it's a weird thing, right? Because our path forward in the world might lead to stuff we're not responsible. Like, once your words are out there in the world, they're the world's now, not yours.
I was thinking about your path that our ancestors trod through the forest. They may be well trodden now, but I think in the beginning, and as they were being traveled, they were pretty bumpy. Yeah, they could be very bumpy and dangerous too. There were a lot of perils out there in the wilderness. So it's not always a smooth. The way is not always smooth. Yeah.
There's a lesbian writer whose name is escaping right now, but she has a book called Speaking of Christ, and I'll remember her name just as soon as we're done with this. She
Call
was
Megan at 3 a.m.
She was the preacher who presided at the worship service where Jeff Johnson and Phyllis and Ruth were ordained, the first 3 kind of openly gay pastors to be ordained. And she, at the beginning of Speaking of Christ, she writes this ancient African proverb as her way of thinking about how communities move forward together. And it's a brutal image, almost as brutal as the cross, but it's also beautiful in a way. And it talks about how locusts cross a river. When locusts cross a stormy river, the first people's carcasses become the bridge for those who come after them. And it's a terrible way of talking about things that people just observe as how the world works, rather than a like, take up your cross, run towards torture kind of method. But if you are someone who is struggling, if you are someone who's a part of a long persevering community, whether that's through identity or skin color or sexuality, you never know where you are in the movement, whether you're the first ones into the water and you're the bridge for the people who come after you. But I think of that kind of way that our ancestors kind of journeyed us towards something. And it's kind of like if our genes and our genealogy and where we are in history is like Google, because there's all these algorithms in the background that point you towards what you're searching,
right.
and you think you're getting just a unbiased, neutral search.
Right.
But I've noticed recently that I'll have conversations and my phone must be listening to me because whatever I was talking about earlier that day is now in my YouTube search. And I'm like, it's not what I want to see a video on.
That's right.
Yeah. And so I wonder how much our communities of faith have shaped us, how much our cultures have shaped us. But I share that as a reminder that sometimes the path we think is the right path, that everybody's marching down, is the wrong bridge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because the people who wanted to continue slavery thought they were headed in the right direction, and they carried it forward. And some people who have believed all kinds of terrible things were marching on a path with other people. Right? That's how the Germans found themselves at the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And so we have to have ways that we can check our gut.
Right.
That we can check the logic of our past and of the saints who have gone before us, and the ways that we can carry our passions forward. But I think that's one of the hardest ethical questions in all of being a faithful person, is how can I know what God is calling me to do?
Yeah.
How can I know what God is calling me to do here and now?
Yeah.
And then even if I figured it out for now, we don't know about tomorrow now. So it's this ongoing trying to figure out
and today
what the path
there's
is.
so much discussion about what it means to be a Christian, and it seems to have divided along political lines in some ways, and each side saying that the other is not being faithful to Christianity. But as I'm thinking about what you're saying, and thinking in a pluralistic way, an interfaith way of there are other paths, other ways, and thinking about the wisdom that lies under all of the great traditions, which is the wisdom of compassion and love and all of those things that when I watch the news sometimes and I think, how is this going to play out in history? Which path is going to end up looking good in the history books, and which way we're going to look back and say, what were they thinking? So how do we know? But I think as I look as like so many things, it's about our own self-awareness and self-reflection. This is a very Lent thing to be thinking of, but how do I understand my faith, my Christianity, which is based and rooted in compassion and the wisdom that is in the other traditions as well. And as long as something is compatible with that sort of the river of wisdom that undergirds, that's not wrong metaphor, but flows under all the traditions, then I feel that I'm on the right path. But if I'm straying into a path that involves hatred, violence, discrimination, that sort of thing, that even though that exists in other religions for sure, but is that part of that wisdom that undergirds them all? If it's not in Christianity and it's not in the Buddhists killing Muslims in Myanmar or whatever, that's not the right path. So I think it's that inner discernment of how are we keying into that wonderful truth that exists.
One of the things that I do to try to check in with myself to see if I'm following the path, one of the kind of mantras that guides me is something that I learned when I was on street retreat with the Faithful Fools. Because when we would go out, we would gather 3 times a day, and then we'd sleep on the streets for a week and just check in with what we are feeling in our bodies and what we're noticing in the city as a deep listening exercise with the homeless and hungry that we walked with on a regular basis. And the mantra that I would carry with me is, may each step be a step closer to God.
That's good.
Right? And I pair that with one of my favorite quotes from Maya Angelou. We did the best we could until we knew better.
Yeah.
Which is an intention to walk ever closer to God, even if it takes us a spiral. In the good place, they call time Jeremy Bearimy.
Yeah.
And they can't figure out how the dot above the I is a part of the linear time frame, right? And so I think our path towards God is a bit of a Jeremy Bearimy, if you are familiar with that image.
Yeah.
But So my intention is, may every step take me closer to
That's
God.
good.
But then I give myself the permission to know that I could only do as good as I knew at the given time with the information that I have. And the intent is to like not look backward with regret and like beat myself up or think I said the wrong thing at a party, which I probably did.
Woulda, shoulda. Yeah.
Sorry about what I said at the party.
Yeah.
I always say the wrong thing. Right? But forgiving myself for not being farther along on the path than I am at any given time.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah.
I have a mantra that I learned from the Buddhists, except I adapted it for myself. And it's similar, but I go through, may I be healthy and happy, and happy in the sense of contented, not haha happy. May I be happy and healthy. May I be grateful. May I be transformed, loving and compassionate, open to your spirit, mindful of your presence. May I be an instrument of your peace. And I go through that several times, listening in myself for where I'm not doing so great at that moment. Maybe I'm not feeling so grateful, or maybe I'm not feeling connected to presence. And then concentrating a little bit more on feeling that, and that seems to help me be grounded.
And St. Francis had a prayer that he put forward, like, make me an instrument of your peace. And you can look it up if you're not familiar with it. But I also think that some of the prayers that we do every Sunday, like the Lord's Prayer, is an intention setting so that we all try to get on the same path with each other. And I think it's been distorted over time to be seen as like a, do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe this? Do you believe this? But the idea that you're asking for the forgiveness you need, that you're seeking not to trespass on other people, that you're seeking to have financial wholeness, that trespass idea is about debts, really, and you're thinking about your stomach, right? And so our path forward is to care for our whole body, for all the things that worry us, and how we're going to walk forward with that together. And this idea that that has always gotten me through, like, I'm not the biggest fan of the Nicene Creed. I don't know if you've known that about me. Susan loves the Nicene Creed. Begat from begat, begotten, not made.
Nope.
True God from true God, light from light.
Outdated philosophy, outdated biblical studies, outdated theology.
Right. So
Wonderful
if you've never
historical document, but
but if you've never heard pastors be honest about which creeds bug them, because we can't usually preach it unless you're in a particular kind of congregation. There's a thing in the Lutheran faith and in some other faiths as well, and it's this idea that you don't have to believe every word in the creed. You get to borrow the faith of your ancestors, meaning you speak the words of the creed out loud, borrowing the faith of other people who believed them, just to breathe together and speak at the same time in Scripture. Susan's not convinced.
I know that's the theory. I know that's no.
But it's the exact same reason that we baptize babies, because the baby can't say, I love Jesus, Jesus is the best, unless they're a very smart baby. And there's this idea in baptism that you borrow the heart of the people who are around you, and they declare out loud, no matter how much you're going to screw this up later in your life, we love you and we think you're perfect in the eyes of God.
Let's say that instead of the
Right?
creed then.
See?
I'm liking that. If we would say that, I'd be okay with that.
All right. I love you and you're perfect in the eyes of God.
Yeah. Let's do it. New creed, right here.
Well, so that's my challenge to all of you. I think that's our challenge from both of us, is think about what your path is. What is your sparkle?
What's your path? What's your sparkle? Yeah.
How do you want to move forward? And if you can you put it into like one word or one mantra? And you're allowed to steal from others who are smarter than you. That's what we did, right? Maya Angelou and
of course.
monks and all of that stuff. So try to, if you can, put who you want to be moving forward into the future into a sentence. And for a week's not very long.
A week.
If you put it in your bathroom where you might have time some days.
It's very Lutheran.
You could just read it. Or you can put it on a Post-it note. I'm a fan of putting Post-it notes up.
Okay.
But just try to say that intention that you have about the path you want to walk.
That helps.
Once a day for a week.
Yeah, it helps to say it.
And at some point you'll realize you're living it.
And then tell us.
Yeah, because we want to walk. I will make a promise right now. If you tell me what your mantra is, I will live your mantra for a week. Okay. I will say your mantra every day.
Okay.
And I will read it to myself, and then I'll come back and I'll tell you how it went.
I'll do it too if it's not the Nicene Creed.
Someone pick the Nicene Creed. It's going to be great. Anyway, well, thank you all for joining us for this conversation about paths. Yeah. Have a blessed Holy Week, which is coming up. Yeah. Have a blessed Palm Sunday, even Good Friday, and a happy Easter on the other side.
Absolutely.
And if you can, join us April 27th, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Yes.
For our live stream of our Pluralism Sunday worship.
Yes. Yeah.
Bye, everybody.